Today we are facilitating our second cohort of the Youth to Business website development program.
My business is IO Collections. I am a fashion designer here in Seattle. I love for the community to experience my culture because I do that with my designs.
Me and my wife runs a seafood store nearby called Wang Tang Seafood. We want to expand, and basically we have a lot of customers out of state. Having a website would simplify the way business is conducted. I hear about this program through Friends of Little Saigon, neighborhood association that helps small businesses.
I worked with the students to build the website, which was a great blessing to have a free website. We will work on the designs one-on-one and have them build a spectacular website, which they did, and I'm so proud of it.
I think it's important for Comcast to support these programs. It basically gives a lot of small business a chance to have a more level playing field.
It's wonderful for Comcast to help small businesses. As a small business owner, we need all the help we can get. We're very grateful for that.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our June Civic Cocktail. How you guys doing tonight? Hey! I'm Alicia Crank, the Executive Director of Seattle City Club. I am so excited for today's conversation and activity. So there's going to be an activity later, so be prepared for that. But I am so grateful for everyone that's here today. It is such an honor to see so many candidates for office, both state and local, in the room today. So I am looking forward to seeing how we engage with one another and share ideas. I first want to thank our premier sponsor, Comcast. Without them, this production would not be possible. And speaking of production, I also want to thank Bermudez Media, who always makes us look good on film. Thank you very much. And to the Collective Seattle, who has been such a great venue partner for us and being able to deliver this programming as well. So thank you very much. Let's give them a round of applause. And this is actually our last Civic Cocktail before we go into the summer. So let's make sure we have a whole bunch of fun. We have things ready for you when we come back in September. But I will tell you, the other thing I want to make sure that I thank, or who I want to thank, are our CEO members, our civically engaged organization and individual members. When we kicked this off earlier this year in January, I was hoping maybe we get 10, 12, and I will say as of last night, we have over 70 individual members and 10 organizational members and counting. With our newest organization being the Seattle Foundation. So thank you very much, all of you that are in the room. That really does help us and, generating revenue, but also making sure that we can remain a sustainable organization so that we can continue to deliver this kind of programming and events. So with that being said, a couple of housekeeping items. One, I want to make sure everyone has their phone silenced. So if you haven't done that, please do that now. And of course, let's make sure that we are all civically engaging and having civil discourse throughout our time tonight. So with that, I want to hand it over to our moderator for our first part of the conversation of breaking barriers and communicating across political divides, Mr. Dave Martin from the King County Dispute Resolution Center.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here today with everyone and to moderate this amazing panel. We had some fun ahead of time kind of chatting it up, and it was a really enjoyable Zoom call. Imagine that. But today, we're going to talk about how we can overcome our deep differences politically and otherwise and have civil conversations. But before we start, I would really like everyone to introduce themselves, starting with you, Andrea.
My name is Andrea Cohen, and I'm a certified facilitator with the Compassionate Listening Project. And I have many more things to say, but I will pass it on to you.
Yeah, so I am Julia Carboni, and I have the great privilege to be the director of the William D. Ruckelshaus Center, which is a joint effort between Washington State University and the University of Washington.
And I'm Ron Mazzal. I'm a father, a husband, a grandfather, a farmer, and when I don't have anything else to do, I'm also the senator from the 10th Legislative District.
The first question's for you, Julia, to start with, which is, what do we mean by civil dialogue, and how do we know when we're successful at it?
What do we mean by civil dialogue? So, how many of you have had a conversation where you've walked away feeling just disgruntled or angry? Yeah, it doesn't feel good. That's not civil dialogue, right? So when we think about civil dialogue, when we think about bringing people together and dialoguing across difference, we want to be able to disagree without being disagreeable. So we want people to walk away. You don't have to have your mind changed, but we want people to walk away having felt heard and having listened to the person that they were speaking with. And so a lot of that is in active listening. How many of you are good listeners? How many of you have partners who would say you're good listeners? Yeah, ask your partner. So for civil dialogue is when you walk away from a conversation feeling heard, you feel respected, and you were able to disagree without being disagreeable. And again, you don't have to change your mind, you don't have to change your position, but you don't walk away feeling disgruntled.
Would either of you like to chime in?
Yeah, I totally agree with what you had to say. And I think that so often when we enter into conversation, we have to be really clear about what our intention is. And if our intention is to understand and connect, that's a very different intention than if we talk to somebody because we want to change their mind. So always keep the intention really clear.
So I spend a fair amount of time listening to people who may not necessarily agree with me. So my saying, and it's a little different than yours, I say we have to agree to disagree agreeably. And that is become more and more difficult in our society. And the level of accountability, my wife's here tonight, so what I say here, I will either be agreed with or not, but she always said, just be nice. That's always been the rule in our house, just be nice. And so I can disagree and still be nice. And unfortunately, that's become the least popular thing to do.
Yeah. Senator Mazzal, could you say a little bit more about that? I mean, you're kind of describing some of the polarization maybe that's been happening in our kind of society at large and in our local area. Could you say more about that?
Well, that comes with a bit of a history lesson. So, and I'm kind of a history buff, but 1,000 years ago, we all lived in tribes. And typically, most tribes were under 100 people. They depended on one another for their food, their shelter, their clothing, and their safety. So programmed in each of the back of our minds is that tribalism, because over the span of history, that's what kept us alive. And so evolution left that into there, in the back of our minds. Our political persuasion is about 40% genetic. The rest of it, the 60% is life experience. They took twins, identical twins, been separated at birth, placed in different homes. When they were mature, they found them, brought them together, and no matter where they grew up, those identical twins had the same political persuasion, whether it was conservative, no matter where they were, it was genetic. And so this tribalism, and you cannot blame someone else for their political feelings. So somebody comes to my office and they have a different political bent, a view than I do. That's theirs and theirs alone. I don't blame them for that. I might blame them in how they put it forward, how they argue their point, how passionate they are on something or how reactive they are to me if I don't necessarily hold that same thing. But I blame social media for a lot of the issues that we have today. I mean, historically, Americans have not always been great about discussing things around the dinner table. In fact, he always said, don't discuss religion or politics at the dinner table. Europeans always did that, and they kind of blame us for having not done that, and that's part of the issue. But social media allows us to surround ourselves with the tribe that agrees with us. And if we do that and only associate with them, whether it's on social media or elsewhere, then that's how we become to believe that we are right. And if we believe that we're 100% right all the time, that's the first step to our downfall, because we aren't. We don't have all the facts, and it's through discussion and disagreement that we learn things that we didn't know before that then impact our view of things. And then, but the worst scenario that I see in our society today is generalization, marginalization, which then results in demonization. And when those three steps are what lead us to the point in time where we associate groups, political parties, whatever, and it's that generalization, marginalization, and then that demonization, that's where we've become then uncivil to one another.
Thank you. Julia, I'm curious, in your work at the Ruckelshaus Center, have you learned anything about some of the different algorithms and different social media outlets and how that kind of exacerbates maybe some of the things that Senator Mizal was describing?
Yeah, so, my background, I'm a professor by trade, I guess. And so one of the things that I have studied is social media. What we know about social media is that the algorithms do feed you things that you're likely to like, right? So if I'm a Democrat, my Facebook, I think we're all Facebook age here, yeah, maybe. My Facebook feed is gonna look a lot different than if I'm a Republican, right? And so it's because it's this algorithm that feeds me the things that I like, it connects me with people that think like I do. And so there have actually been experiments where you can, like conservative or liberal causes, and your feed starts to change dramatically. What we also know about this idea of demonization, so my old friend and colleague Lou Kreisberg, who is a scholar of conflict, he talks a lot about conflicts hardening and conflict cycles. And so once we start to other people, it becomes easier to hate them, it becomes easier to demonize them, and then to just cast them aside, right? So that's a big problem, and social media feeds into it because all of a sudden we think that everybody thinks like we do, and when we look around or we meet somebody who doesn't think the way that we do, we think that they are probably in the minority. And so in our work at the Ruckelshaus Center, we've been thinking about this a lot. And so we've been working with Lieutenant Governor Heck and his office to think about how do we repair civic health? How do we reduce polarization and strengthen democracy, right? Regardless of what your political persuasions are. And we think the root of that is really in getting people together in the same room, because it is hard to hate someone that you know or have to interact with, right? And so last fall, we launched the Project for Civic Health. We have a website, it's projectforcivichealth.org, where we brought together leaders from across the state. We had a lot of political diversity, geographic diversity, age diversity, racial, gender, ethnic diversity. And we brought people and we said, hey, we think there's something wrong. We see polarization. Here's what we're hearing from other conversations. What do you think about it? And then instead of having panels talk to them all day, we designed a participatory process with the Evans School at the UW and the Jackson Foundation. And we said, okay, let's hear what you have to say, and let's co-create some solutions so that we can strengthen democracy in our state. And so from that, drawing on these 200 leaders from around the state, we've done a number of things, including what we're calling WASCELI, which is the Washington Collaborative Elected Leadership Institute, in partnership with the Washington Association for Cities, where we're going to do collaborative leadership training for leaders around the state, city elected officials, and their staff. Part of this is to help them tackle complex policy issues in teams and learn to collaborate with others. Part of it is to just get people in the same room. Again, they're from all over the state, all kinds of political persuasions, and they're going to spend a couple days at a time together tackling problems, working together, and not necessarily talking about our political persuasions or, you know, what it is we want, our positions, but really looking at the interests. And as we're looking through applications and we're notifying people that they've come in, one of the things that we see across the political spectrum is that people want to do right by their constituents. And the way that they do that might be different, but we're really gonna harness that energy that says, okay, you really want to be of service to your constituents. Let's see how we can do that collaboratively, how we can not disagree without being disagreeable, but what was it? Agree to disagree agreeably. Okay, I'm gonna work on that. And so we're building that programming. We are also working to convene civic leaders from across the state. People who are working on civic health will do a convening in September in Olympia, and we'll continue to build that network to bring people together from across the state, across the political spectrum, so they can get to know each other and know that this is not your enemy, right? This is a person who loves the state of Washington, loves their constituents and their communities, and we can do more together.
Yeah, and Andrea, could you describe how the labels that we ascribe to others and assumptions and judgments inhibit our understanding?
Yeah, I think that when people label another person, it becomes very much of an us versus them kind of thing. And when we're in dialogue with people, it's very easy for us to label someone as somebody who's red, somebody who's blue, somebody who's a Democrat, somebody who's a Republican. And we make assumptions based on that characterization about, assumptions based on the labels. And I think the challenge for each and every one of us is how to recognize, number one, that we're doing that, and then ground ourselves in what's our intention. Is our intention to understand the other person, to understand the values beneath the label. And that often requires each of us, if we want to become really solid, deep listeners, to notice when we get triggered by somebody labeling us, or by us, it's very easy to label one another, and to recognize our triggers, to ground ourselves in our intention, which is to learn and to connect, and to perhaps find commonality of the deep underlying values. And I think that's a challenge that each and every one of us can take on with people in our own lives. So family members, friends who we may stay away from because we assume that they hold different positions. And that's our opportunity to practice and grow in our capacity to listen and to care and be kind and to try and understand each other. And then from that place, maybe we can begin to create the world that we all want to live in, which is one where there's healing and peace. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Oh, yeah, and then some. I guess one thing I would ask as a follow-up would be, do you have an example that you might be willing to or able to share with us for how you might have been able to do that in your own life?
So, one of the things that I think about is one of the most powerful programs that I've been involved with through Compassionate Listening, which is a Jewish-German reconciliation project, and where I grew up with a very strong sense of my own embedded history of the Holocaust in my family, and how Germans were always demonized in the family. And I went to Germany with Jewish Americans, and we met with non-Jewish Germans, and it was the most powerful experience of learning about each other. And we became a family in many ways across the divide. Very, very powerful experience. I've had many experiences like that. But when I think about the Jewish-German project, that speaks to me today. And the challenges play out in what's going on in Israel and Gaza. It's lots of stuff about how to listen and understand and honor what's embedded in us, and then find out what's embedded in other people from our own personal experiences, and then grab onto the values that we say we care about and make decisions about what we think is the right thing to do in the present moment. So I could go on, but I want to be relevant as well.
It's such a beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing that and sharing that part of yourself with us. What are some examples of civil dialogue that are happening in our state? I think you mentioned something, Julie, that you're working with Lieutenant Governor Heck on right now. I'm wondering, are there other examples that you might have as well, Senator Mizal?
Well, interestingly, so the Lieutenant Governor asked me to sit in on the first roundtable that we had in his office, and then in Auburn, or was it Auburn last year? Renton last year, I attended that as well, and he asked me to be on the Civic Health Collaborative Joint Legislative Task Force. That, let me tell you, you get to Olympia and the acronyms go on and on and on, and the titles just get longer. Anyhow, so I've also been involved with Civility First, which in Island County is a group. And last June, the Lieutenant Governor came up and he and I sat down with the moderator and had a almost 2-hour conversation about what we see the threats to the civic health if we don't do something about. And then Jared Mead and Nate Naring, along with mainstream Republicans, have put together a Building Bridges project. And I moderated one of those in Arlington, where a group, maybe 22 of us, sat down and talked about what are the leading issues that we see in the community. And that was also very good. So, and I take every opportunity to do this here because, I'm white, I'm past middle age, I'm a Christian, and I'm a Republican. And if you would follow some social media, I also would have horns and a tail. To try to crush the stereotype of what a white Republican is. We have the same problems. We have the same issues. We have the same heartbreak. I lost a niece last year in April to substance abuse disorder. She was very popular in Seattle here, had many popular businesses. She had grown up in our household, lived with us and our daughters, and a part of me died last April when she died. And so I have very strong feelings about behavioral health and substance abuse. And that's something I don't think there's any political divide. Maybe there's a divide on how to cure us of those. There's some disagreement there. But, I think that for those of us who have been impacted by that, we're all at the same level, It's heartbreaking. I can sit on a tractor with tears streaming down my face and remembering the times and remembering the loss. And like I say, a part of me died that day with her. So we have way more in common than we have apart.
And so I would just add to that. People are people, right? So a little bit about my background. I am mixed race. I grew up in the Deep South, so I'm from Little Rock, Arkansas. I have a black mother, white father, grew up in a black community. I say all this because Little Rock is one of the most segregated cities in the country. It continues to be so. And I was a kid that did not fit anywhere. You were either black or you were white, but you couldn't be in the middle. And so I spent my childhood being a bridge builder, mostly so I wouldn't get beat up or bullied. So you have to learn to listen to people, right? And so when you start listening to people and your purpose is to hear them, your purpose is to maybe not get bullied, but your purpose is really important in how you listen to people. And if you're listening to argue with people, you're setting yourself up for failure. So when we think about people being people, just like this, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you know, when you go in and you listen with the purpose of getting to know someone, or when we're called to public service, if you listen with the intent of making your place better, leaving this place better than you found it, you're gonna get a lot further than if you're listening to win a point. When you're winning that point, you're actually losing out, right? And so sitting, listening, having awkward pauses, being curious, asking questions, going back to the what is civil dialogue, that's what civil dialogue is about. It's listening with the intent of learning, it's listening with the intent of building, maybe of being a bridge. And so I just wanna say, if you are having a conversation to win it, you're just gonna lose. And you're gonna go back and you're gonna be angry and talk about how stupid that other person was and you couldn't believe that they had this idea and oh my God, I can't believe it. And that doesn't serve anybody. So really thinking beyond yourself, beyond winning and looking good, what does it mean to have a conversation with somebody that you don't feel aligned with?
Thanks, Julia. And you know, I think we're about to start the Q&A portion, and I wanted to offer up anyone in the audience who has any questions to feel free to do so. And Jeff will help with the microphone. And I think we have at least we have a few already.
Hi, my name is Sonatina Sanchez, and the conversation's been great about listening. And my question comes from one of our great communicative elders, James Baldwin. And I'm probably not going to get the quote exactly right, but basically he said, right, I can disagree with you unless your disagreement is based on degrading me or my humanity, and so that's one of the things that I feel is often missing from these conversations about civility, is that we can talk about policy and yet, like, the kids I work with, especially queer kids who run away from communities where they aren't listened to, and they come and end up here in Seattle and are listened to, and often aren't given the support they need here either. And so I focus a lot on, it feels like the people who aren't listened to because of who they are, not necessarily what they believe.
One of the things I would say about that is ground rules are really important for conversation. So you should never put yourself in a situation where you could be hurt or, you know, disrespected or dehumanized, right? And so if you know you're going into a conversation where you feel unsafe, it's worthwhile to take some time to set some ground rules and to say, these are the things that we're going to hold each other accountable to. It could be things like having respectful dialogue, other things like that, and then giving a person an opportunity to correct themselves, saying, hey, we agreed to be respectful in our dialogue, and I'm not seeing that when you do X. And so really focusing on the behavior. And if people cannot be accountable to the rules that they've agreed to, then you walk away from the conversation. Not all conversations can be had. And then if people won't agree to ground rules, that's a real big red flag, right? And so I would never suggest you put yourself into a situation where it is dangerous, where you could be hurt, or where your rights could seriously be trampled, right? What I am suggesting is that don't be afraid to talk to people who are not in agreement with you, so long as you have those ground rules for discussion.
You're exactly right, and that's the part of we have to agree to disagree agreeably, and part of that agreement is that we have respectful dialogue. I mean, you cannot have respectful dialogue if you're insulting. I would also say that, and this is another thing that I think we need to come to an agreement on, virtue signaling. Virtue signaling is one of the most negative things that you can do if you want to have a constructive dialogue. Because virtue signaling is all about, well, I'm better because, and it could be, I don't know, I recycle aluminum cans, or I do this, or I do that. And that is not constructive dialogue when you're virtue signaling to the other person to build yourself up. So.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, without taking up too much more airspace. The virtue signaling, yeah, it's a real thing, but also meeting people in mundane moments. So, growing up in a Black community, people show up when there's a crisis, and white people in particular show up when there is a crisis and there is something that needs to be addressed, right? So when George Floyd was murdered a couple summers ago, there were a lot of people showing up. Where are those people now? Are they still in the room? Are they still doing the work? Are they still building relationships? And so that's what you got to think about. Don't just show up when there's a crisis. Show up and meet people and talk to them before there's a crisis. We know from research that dealing with a crisis goes a lot better if you have pre-existing relationships. And so just something for you to sit with is when you are doing allyship or whatever it is you want to call it, are you doing it when there's a crisis? Are you doing it where you can be visible and people can see you performing? Or are you showing up every day to just have coffee with someone that doesn't look like you, doesn't think like you, and learn from them, where you can do it in a situation where tensions are not high? So if you are an ally that only shows up in a crisis, sit with that and think about it. Do something different, be better.
I think we have a question in the front row. A couple. Right here.
Thanks for having me here. My name's David Olson. I'm a candidate for superintendent of public instruction. I've been on the school board in my local community for over 10 years, and I'd like to initially pose a question to you, Julia, is around social media use and cell phone use. So Jonathan Haidt wrote a book called The Anxious Generation, and my school district recently, this school year, restricted cell phone use and social media for our children because of the damage that it's doing to our young children's mental health, especially young girls, about cyberbullying and the amount of hate that's on Instagram for especially elementary schools and middle school kids. And so I was recently at an event in Spokane, and I spoke directly to the parents and said, if you have given your kids, elementary or middle school kids, a smartphone with social media, read that book, Anxious Generation, about the damage it's doing. So even though that's about children, you mentioned algorithms, but what can parents do, and this is a nonpartisan issue, as far as restrict, and maybe this isn't even for this forum, it could be for grown-ups as well, about the algorithms that's impacting their lives. What can parents do to disengage from social media and cell phones to get back to being parents and being, like when we were kids, many of us in this room when we were kids, we went out and played, and it was okay to skin our knee and fall off the jungle gym. People to social media focus now. What do you think parents or across the divide can do to get off social media and then start engaging people in civil discourse instead of being focused only on social media? And I don't know if I articulated that well, but.
Yeah, and I think, that book is really based on this idea that we've moved away from a play-based childhood into a social media-based childhood. And I would offer another book that's called 14 Conversations to Have Before Your Child Turns 14. It's something like that. The last name is Ifill, and she's a middle school counselor. And the point that she makes in a lot of the work that we do is that you can't take it away, right? Like, it's there, it's gonna be there. Kids are gonna access it if they really want to. And so certainly putting limits on things is important, but also having conversations with your kids, with your loved ones, and making sure that you're building those ground rules. Here's how we use social media, here's how we don't use social media. And also making sure that you have a good relationship and dialogue with your children. I have a 15-year-old. He's here. I won't call him out, but if you see him, you'll know because he looks just like me. We don't monitor his social media so much, but we have conversations about what it is, what it's not. And then, I think as people, we should also look to see how we're we're putting things out there as well. You know, there's a lot of diet culture that affects girls. There are a lot of moms that buy into that. Like, what are you saying to your kids? What are you saying about yourself? And are you having conversations to put guardrails? I think that's back to the ground rules, guardrails, and then continuing in that dialogue. I think sometimes we say, as parents, here's the rule, follow it, do as I say, not as I do, and then we're not good role models, but we also don't continue the conversation or tell kids why we might have that rule. And so I would say it all comes back to dialogue and building relationships, and sometimes that means that you've got to put those phones away, lock them in a box. There's actually studies to show that when students go into classes and they have their cell phones with them, they are dumber. Not that they're actually dumber, but that they do worse on tests, right? And it's not clear what the mechanism is. And so at the Maxwell School, where I was a professor at Syracuse University, there were a number of professors that had boxes that just said, put your cell phone in, we're gonna learn stats or econometrics, and we can't do that if you're looking at your phone. And so really it's ground rules. You can't take it away, it's here, but ground rules. So I don't know.
I think one of the things that I would say is for parents to be role models and to watch our own addictions, because I notice for myself that I have an addiction to my cell phone, and when I become aware of that, then I can pull back. And I think kids, are very susceptible to what's being role modeled by the adults, not just what they lecture about, but how are they behaving. So I would just add that.
Another good book is The Chaos Machine, and it goes into all of the algorithms. I mean, and of course we love to pick on Facebook, but I mean, clear to YouTube, it starts you down a path. I think the counter to that is critical thinking. And that is, if you hear something, don't believe it until you can corroborate it. And I mean, we see that with news media. I see that in Olympia, where somebody is quoting something. Well, for instance, and this is inside joke, but we had a senator that was quoting a quote off of Wikipedia to the wrong person. Well, Wikipedia isn't an encyclopedia. It's, it isn't the truth. And so, fortunately, I was friends with her, and I got up on the floor and corrected her, and she never forgave me for that. But, and it was, I don't know, it was Benjamin Franklin, but it was really Thomas Jefferson. But off of Wikipedia isn't 100% right. I mean, this is the problem with, we live in an information age, but I just kind of assume half of it isn't true. Half of the information you're hearing isn't true until you've corroborated that. And if we would go down that path on everything, just critically thinking, or, boy, that doesn't sound right, and then I'll go and I'll find out, oh no, it wasn't 1 billion, it was 1 million. They just, got the consonant wrong. But it makes a lot of difference whether it was 1 billion or 1 million. But this is the thing about, we're bombarded by all this stuff. I always told my kids, don't believe it. Don't believe it until you can prove it, because that's how we get pulled down these paths, and that's how the algorithms work as well.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. And
Hi, thanks. My name is Kim Becklin. I'm a board member of City Club pretty recently, and I'm really tickled you all are here. It's a huge issue facing all of us. What I'm interested in, when you mentioned the Ruckel House and the work you're doing, how is it that we can better understand some of the outcomes that you're getting from that? Because I think your message collectively is one of hope. And I'm really appreciating that, because the more tools we have and the more we can convey that, and truth finding, like you mentioned, are really important, that critical thinking path. So where can we go, and how do we message that face to face, so that we're teaching one another this new path of deeper learning, understanding, and listening? Because I think that where that lives is how we're going to really change the culture.
So for the Ruckels House Center, for our civic health work, a lot of it gets fed into that Project for Civic Health website. So I would encourage you to check that out. But one of the things that we're doing that's a little bit different than prior programming is we're using what's a method called art of hosting. And you don't have to know that, but what it means is that we harvest what's being said. And so we do a visual harvest, or we actually have we have this really brilliant woman named Jessica Gill who comes in and she draws what people are doing as they're doing it. And then we harvest the ideas and we try to turn them around really quickly. And we'll post those on the website. And so that's what we've been doing with the summit. It's what we'll do with some of the collaborative leadership training we're doing and putting it out there. We are also working with some students from the Evans School over the summer to put together some guides. So part of this is with the Association for Washington Cities to think about what does it mean to be a collaborative leader. And really that just means being a good listener and being a good participant. And so we're churning stuff out. And then, long term, we would like to have more forums where we can just bring people together to talk. I have this dream of having a human library where you can come and check someone out and hear about their life story. And we haven't really gotten that off the ground, but in our civic health work, we're trying to create more spaces, and not just in Seattle, but around the state where people can come together and talk. The final thing I'll say about the Ruckelshaus Center is that we've been really trying to engage with disseminating our projects, right? So the things that we're learning. So for example, we just wrapped up a 3-year project on pathways to housing. So looking at the housing crisis in the state of Washington, this really beautiful report that my team put together, looking at sort of what are the things that lead to homelessness. And now we're going around the state and trying to think with cities in particular, what can we do with what we've found, right? How can we take this information and create situations where people have pathways to housing? What are the things that we can do at the local level from a policy perspective? What are the things we can do at the state level? And then, we're also trying to engage more than just policymakers. We're trying to engage business and nonprofits to come together and have conversations, because really when we're thinking about civic health, when we're thinking about other policy issues, you can't solve it in a vacuum. If you could do that, it would have been solved by now. So we need some out-of-the-box thinking. So keep an eye on our website, Project for Civic Health website, and then as we get these things together, this programming together, we'll be pushing that out through those 2 websites.
So another group I haven't been involved in, but I have a lot of respect for, is called Braver Angels. And Braver Angels partners up those of opposing viewpoints, typically partisan, and allows them to develop a relationship. And it really has had, for those that I know that have been involved, really has had a huge impact on their thought processes and their civility. And they have a national convention, but they've got a state group. And those that I know who have been involved in it really has been a positive influence on their ability to have civil dialogue, because now they've met somebody that they had demeaned or didn't feel they had anything in common with, and they did. We're all humans. We each of us have some common point, and it's about letting down the walls and then engaging to find that, and then when you find that, then building on that.
And I would just like to add one thing about what we do in compassionate listening. It's an art form to be a deep, compassionate listener. And we have, if you would go to our website, which is www.compassionatelistening.org, we have a set of practices that really support people in bringing the skills needed to keep your heart open as well as your mind, to listen to your body, the places of integrated wisdom that we all hold, how to make that real in our everyday lives. And it is an art, and it starts with each and every one of us as we are with our families and our friends, and it requires certain practices and awarenesses. So I would recommend that as well.
Thanks, everyone. And before we conclude, I have one comment, from the moderator, which is, I'm with the Dispute Resolution Center of King County. Our website is kcdrc.org. We have training called CORE, which is Conflict Resolution for Everyone. which provides people with an opportunity to learn how to deal with conflict better in their own lives. This program is a 40-hour program with a certificate at the end of it. But you don't need to take all 40 hours. You can just take a few different sessions, like active listening, like better communication, like a lot of the skills that folks were talking about. And I want to let everyone know it is entirely free for everyone who resides in King County for the next year. And that is part of that. The curriculum was developed from funding that was really supported through the leadership of Jamila Taylor, Representative Taylor in the 30th District. And also recently we received funding from the King County Council with leadership with Claudia Balducci to allow us to make that free for everyone. This is the time that everyone should be taking it. It's virtual, and that's my only shameless plug for the night. Thanks everyone so much.
Thank you all so much. Thank you. So when we come back, we're going to just be together for a little bit. And then we are going to do small group activity. So we're going to have plenty of time to talk to one another and ask each other questions. So take the next 10 minutes, refresh your libation, and come on back. Okay, everybody, and welcome back to Civic Cocktail. I am now joined by one of our board members, Jillian Youngblood, who also is executive director of a similar organization called Civic Genius. Hi, Jillian.
Hi, Alicia. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So before we have Jillian talk about what we're going to do next, I just wanted to hit on a couple of things that was talked about during the first panel, which is one, I am so grateful that we had such a great conversation for that first panel. It was a great conversation, right? Yes. And so, you know, he talked about the Building Bridges project, and that's one that's really close to me because I live up in Snohomish County, so they're my county council members up there, and they have just done a really great job in taking this listening tour, which was called Building Bridges, and they turned it into an actual project. So now it's called the Building Bridges Project. It's focused on high schoolers in Snohomish County. And we are actually going to be partnering with them during the debate season this coming fall. So more to come. But when we launched our Civically Engaged Youth Council, we really wanted to make sure that the youth was represented during the debates and obviously would create more voters out of them. So I'm very excited to see how we work together. This coming fall. We will be doing debates for the governor's race, the attorney general's race, OSPI, and then the local Seattle City Council race this fall. So stay tuned, and thank you so much for, in advance at least, for participating in that process. So as we talk about communicating across political divides, Jillian was like, I want to do something cool. So I'm like, okay. So if it's cool, totally thank her and me, but if you don't like it, blame her, not me. So
just say it's cool, however you feel. There was a good quote from our friend, the senator who was here.
So Jillian, tell us what we're going to do today.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Jillian Youngblood. I am, as Alicia said, the executive director of Civic Genius. We are a national, nonpartisan civic engagement organization focused on deliberative democracy, which is, I'm sure, a phrase everyone is using every day. No, of course not. It's not really a thing here yet. So basically what I mean by deliberative democracy is that when we're making public policy decisions, we're not doing it through debate where someone wins and someone loses and we are adversaries. We're deliberating in the way that you would on a jury, for example. So we're weighing the pros and cons of different policy approaches. We are all looking at the same body of evidence. When is the last time that you felt like you were operating on the same set of facts as everyone in the conversation? not all the time. And we were doing the things that all of the panelists earlier were talking about, which is that we're listening really deeply, we're looking for common ground, and we're finding opportunities that we can build on in order to create a policy solution. Because at the end of the day, it's wonderful to come to talk to people who maybe think differently than you, who have different lived experiences. That's really powerful. We should all be doing that all of the time. But we care about making change, right? Like, I care what the laws say. I care what our policies are. So we need to go a step further. So one of the main ways that this is happening around the world is through something called a citizen assembly. There have been more than 600 of these around the world. They're very common throughout Europe, increasingly in Canada, in Australia. Looking at a French friend of ours who knows all about these, I know. In a citizen assembly, a government brings together a random representative group of people from some jurisdiction. This could be an entire country, it could be a city, it could be a state, and they are working with experts, as I described earlier, to all work from the same information. They are hearing from advocates on all sides of an issue. You really get a 360-degree understanding of what an issue is and what all the different approaches to it could be. And then that group makes recommendations, formal recommendations to the government that commissioned this assembly. The government in advance has agreed to formally accept those recommendations, to consider them, and to respond to them. And more often than not, what that means is that what comes out of the assembly, at least in some form, becomes law. So this is how Ireland, for example, changed its abortion laws and its gay marriage laws. You may have heard that those policies happened. You may not have known that they came out of a citizen assembly. This is how cities around the world make urban planning decisions. You can really use this process on any kind of tricky issue where people disagree. So every issue. So, you know, one of the central pieces of a citizen assembly is you have to talk to people who are different than you, right? This can be difficult, as you know. We all have strong opinions about things. Often those opinions are very valid. You may have a really good reason that you believe what you believe, and it's not necessarily enough to just sort of get it out of your system and go nowhere with it. And I apologize, I'm looking at notes. I was on a 6 a.m. flight from DC this morning. It's been a long day. So, you know, we're all humans, and people have a hard time kind of imagining what it's like to sit down with someone who thinks very differently from you and come to some kind of a conclusion. So tonight we're going to play a game that shows that it's possible. It's going to be fun, right?
Yes.
So,
and it looks like we're going to yeet a fish, cracking folks.
Oh, we're going to yeet some fish. So we used to do this with beach balls, but we're in Seattle. We're not going to throw beach balls. We're going to throw salmon, obviously, right? So it's very, very serious. We're very professional here. So I'll just say one more thing, actually, before we start throwing salmon, which is if you're at a Seattle City Club event, you probably have a Seattle Times subscription, a New York Times subscription. I bet you all subscribe to a bunch of Substacks. And I don't know if this happens to you. This happens to me constantly, where I'm in a conversation about whatever issue it is that we're talking about. I say something, someone says something to me, and I'm like, oh, if you had read the Atlantic article that I read about this thing, you would know that the reason blah, 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 yes. That's why there's no affordable housing or whatever it is. My sister accuses me of facting her to death. Like, I read the thing. Yeah. If you read the thing, you would get it. So that doesn't work. I won't get into the neuroscience of it, but like, you know, that doesn't work, right? So what we're going to do is play this game that helps us tease out what the complexities of an issue are, figure out where we might find common ground, and lay a foundation that we could actually build real policy solutions on top of. So we might not get 100% of the way there. This is a game with stuffed fish, but we're gonna start to see how we could do that. So Alicia, could we do a little demo to show people what I'm talking about?
I feel like we should.
Do you mind standing up with me so we can throw this fish?
Oh, yes. I want to yeet the fish. Okay.
So here's how it's going to work. You guys are going to be in small groups of 6 to 8. I would recommend finding people you don't know who you actually might not have a bunch of stuff in common with. It's more fun that way.
Yes.
I'm going to make a policy recommendation. I'll just pick an issue like income tax in Washington State, a nice light one. And I'm going to, nothing we say, I'll say is representative of maybe what we actually think. We're just as a demo. Yeah. So I'll say, Alicia, I think we should abolish the capital gains tax in Washington state because it is making Washington an unfriendly place for innovation. And I want this to be a place where innovators want to come. I'm going to toss you this fish. And you're not going to say, okay, I get the innovation thing, but you're going to yes and me. Are there any like theater nerds or just regular nerds?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So you're going to say some piece of this that you can agree with, something you can latch onto.
Okay.
And you're going to add onto it so that we can keep this conversation going instead of shutting it down because you didn't read the same article as me.
Got it. Okay. I want innovators to come here too. So yes to that. And I believe at the same time, we need to figure out a way to make sure that sales tax doesn't take over what the other thing would have done.
We can even do another round of this.
Yes.
So yes, I think I understand your point on the sales tax. So I've heard that maybe that disproportionately impacts working families, and I care a lot about working families too. So yes, and maybe we can craft a tax system that is still friendly to innovation and business here, but is really targeted in a way that doesn't, make people feel like they all want to move to Florida.
Got it. So you got it? Because no one wants to go to Florida.
All
So
right, come on. Oh, we forgot to toss the fish back. You get a fish. You get a fish. Okay, so we're going to try this. I'm just going to throw out an issue, which is affordable housing. So you guys are going to get into groups. We have plenty of space here.
Yes.
We have space upstairs. And anyone who wants to take the lead can grab a fish. Milka, could you grab me a fish?
We have plenty of fish.
We have
not the dating site, but
it's actually only a dozen fish. That's a terrible idea. I'm sorry. I thought of it, but so you're going to have a fish. Whoever feels brave enough to start with a policy proposal is going to do what I just did, which is say, I think we should X. And then whoever's ready to take that on, they're going to toss the fish. Yeah. Do you want a fish? We're gonna get into small groups to do this, but you look like a man who needs a fish.
Okay.
Okay.
So stay there. So we're going to. So I was going to assign people. But we're not going to do that. You're grown people. You can do it. So we have plenty of space here, over there in the lobby way. So if you want to get into like groups of 6 to 8 people, we'll do that for about 20 minutes. And we'll walk around and check in on you at the same time, and then we'll come back and see what we learned. Right. So we'll be right back. Okay, everybody, welcome back. Was that a fun activity? It was nice to get you guys, get the blood flowing, get your juices cooking. So, Jillian, I'm going to toss it back to you. How do you want to close this? How do you want to get feedback from everybody?
Yeah, I'd love, so we could do one of two things, which is we'd love to just hear if people have impressions from that process, and also really happy to answer questions about citizen assemblies, deliberation, how you could work those kinds of practices into the way that we make decisions locally. Doesn't have to be, like in a citizen assembly, you're not throwing fish at each other. It's a little bit more professionalized. So yeah, questions and comments.
All right. I think that the most important thing that all of us realize is that being included in the conversation, we get a better solution. We have more ideologies, even if we differ, and we continue to pile on and come up with a complex solution to a complex problem, right? So the more ideologies that we put together, the better the solution is. And I think that that was what I took out of it anyway.
Thank you. I'm going to throw you a fish.
Hi. I have to have. Yes. Hi, everyone. It was great. I mean, my group is over there hiding. It was really interesting. I think everybody tried to listen to each other a lot more and more carefully. And I like these exercises a lot. I was doing this in France, and so I have a question. How do the citizen assembly that you work with react when the policy they decided on is not accepted or rejected? It happened to me in France multiple times. How do you deal with it, or how do the elected officials deal with the disappointment that comes with
Yeah, this is a really good question. So if I can paraphrase and maybe even add on to it a little bit, you run a citizen assembly because you want what comes out of that assembly to actually become the policy, right? So what happens if the legislators just reject all of the recommendations? Then you've run this big, complex, fairly expensive process for everyone to feel more disappointed than they would have if they hadn't participated to begin with. So what we know from the research coming out of where we've seen these around the world is that oftentimes what will happen is you'll have, say the assembly comes up with 100 recommendations, which sometimes does happen in a national assembly. Usually what will happen is you'll see the legislature take something like 60 of them and say, these are great, we're gonna implement these. 20 of these, this is good, we're gonna need to tweak them. It actually conflicts with some other law. There's a reason we can't quite do it like this, but in the spirit of these recommendations, we're gonna do something. And then 20 of these are just unworkable. And what's kind of interesting is that people mostly say, these are people who participated in the assembly and who are just broadly aware of it, they mostly say, okay, that seems reasonable. There's not like massive outcry for the most part. And the research shows that people in assemblies are pretty happy to be a consultative body. If you ask them, do you think we should replace elected officials with citizens' assemblies? Most people say no, we would like to add to the conversation. We think we have stuff that is not being talked about, but you know, we're not experts, like I don't wanna do this all day. So broadly, people are pretty understanding. What we do see happening sometimes is that recommendations get shelved because actually these have become so popular that they're happening a lot. So if you're in a place like Belgium that has a lot of layers of government, there are just citizen assemblies going on all the time, to the point that people are like, how are we going to participate in all of these assemblies, which is its own question. But I just lost my train of thought. So what you find in these places is that you know, a legislature can't do every single thing, right? So you get these great recommendations and they're like, okay, it's on the list. And that's really frustrating for people. So I think what you really need is not just to run this as a standalone process that lives in a silo, but it needs to be part of the way that a community makes decisions. You need to have some kind of infrastructure on the front end that educates people about what the process is, because really you're only having 50, 100 people at most. If we were doing this in Seattle, you'd have, I don't know, 75 people. So most people are not participating in the assemblies. So you need a lot of education on the front end so that people can understand what's going on. They can understand that it's a really transparent process. They know that they can go watch all of the expert testimony, for example, on YouTube, like it's all public. And then on the back end, you need some kind of infrastructure that says, okay, we made those recommendations, now what? And people need to be able to organize on the back end and say like, okay guys, we gave you the recommendations, you said you liked them, you said you were gonna do it, what's next? And people need the kind of basic nuts and bolts civic education to know what to do, to know you have to get a meeting, you have to go to a town hall, you have to go do all the things that you do if you wanna see a policy get passed.
Do we have anybody else that wants to share from their group? Good catch.
Thank you. It was super engaging. I really appreciated us focusing on listening to one another so that we can find some shared grounds or perspectives. And I appreciate our group because we were very democratic. Everybody had a voice before we share airspace. So thank you for this.
Thank you. See, she didn't hit me this time. Okay. Well, we're gonna stop there. This was such a great conversation. It was so wonderful to walk around and kind of see everyone just kind of come into the groups rather easily, and see so many of you engaged in that conversation. So thank you so much. Thanks for experimenting with us in this, and thank you, Jillian, for proposing this idea for us as we close out before we go into our summer break. Everybody. Aww. But I have stuff for you. So as we get ready to close out, a couple of things I do want to share with you is one, during the summer, we don't have our Civic Cocktail, but we will have some member-only activities going on. So if you have not signed on to be a CEO member, do so immediately. You are going to love what we have coming up, including we're all going to go to the Champions of Change celebrity basketball game. later this month, but you got to be a member if you want free tickets. So you got to do that. And you know a girl loves her sports. Also, we'll also have a special open house here in August. And then when we come back in September, we'll be back and we're going to have some very election-focused civic cocktails because we know it's a huge election year, and more details to come about that. And the Washington State Debate Coalition, which is one of our signature programs, we are planning to convene at least 4 debates this fall. We will be doing the city council race debate at Seattle Central College in September. We'll also be doing one there for the Attorney General's race. And for the first time, we'll be up in Snohomish County, and we are going to have a debate there for OSPI. And in Central Washington at CWU, we will be doing a governor's race debate there as well. So look out for that information. If you can find a way individually or organizationally to support that mission, that will be wonderful. We make sure that it's broadcast quality, that it's live streamed for every citizen within this state to be able to access for free, but we know free is not free. So if you want to be a sponsor to help us be able to deliver this programming, we really appreciate it. I again want to give kudos to my team, Jeff Carter, my program manager, to Bermudez Media for always pulling this together. Our board of directors, thank you so much for just, doing all the things. And again, to our members and also just all of you that are watching and participating, we wouldn't be able to do this without you. An empty room is not a fun room to be in, right? So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of this wonderful weather, and we'll see you at the next Civic Cocktail in September. Take care, everybody.